As they sent missionaries off on different journeys, they devoted themselves to prayer as oppression began to afflict the church in Jerusalem and as believers scattered. They prayed for Peter when he was in prison, and then could hardly believe the answer to their prayer when it took place. Paul and Silas prayed in prison, and the foundations of the prison shook and they were freed. Paul prayed with the elders of various churches as he traveled. Everywhere we find that the church was immersed in prayer, and that God answered those prayers. Not only in the early church, but also throughout the history of the church, prayer has always preceded revival. Today, around the world, prayer seems most valued in those places where the church is most under oppression. The persecuted church gathers in small groups, secretly, to pray for one another and for the growth of their church. And in spite of persecution, the church is growing in many, many parts of the world. The churches in America that are growing also place a priority on prayer, seeking wisdom for decisions, for launching new ministries, for coping with trials, always praying together. We have a challenge before us. What does it mean to pray in community? There are many examples, many opportunities for us to gather to pray. One of the characteristics of praying together is that we develop a sense of humility and simplicity. Jesus tells the parable about the Pharisee and the tax collector praying. And the tax collector prays very humbly, the Pharisee prays very loudly and boldly. And the point of that prayer of that parable is to illustrate that God does not honor the prayer of the Pharisee because he's basically already gotten what he wanted, which was attention. Whereas the tax collector wanted forgiveness, knew that he stood in need of that, and was willing to ask for that at any cost. A second principle of small group prayer is that it be orderly, that everyone in the group have a chance to pray. Everyone has the chance to voice their prayers, and everyone has a chance to just listen and agree in silence. Coming together in prayer is an indication of a church's unity, that they are seeking God together for whatever direction that God has for them. Finally, our praying together is an expression of our love for God and our love for one another. We express our love through compassionate listening to the needs of others and by allowing others to express their needs and concerns through prayer. Now, the Christian life really is about growing up in community. All of those examples of prayer that are in the New Testament that demonstrate the church at prayer are seconded by the teachings of the epistle writers, Paul and the others, who, when they talk about prayer, are talking to a whole church. Now, certainly the principles that they talk about apply to us individually as well. To rejoice, to confess, those are things that apply to each individual Christian. But they also apply to the church, that these are things that we should be doing together. When we enter into a time of sharing our petitions and our needs and our prayer time, we need to be honest and open with one another and with God. We don't have to go into specifics or great detail. We don't need to use a lot of words even. The model that Jesus gives us for prayer, the Lord's Prayer, is really very succinct. It's not flowery, it's not involved, it's not complicated. It's very specific and very to the point. We acknowledge God as our source of all things. We ask Him to provide for us. We focus on Him. This kind of praying can open our hearts to know God's will and His answer to specific petitions. But sometimes we don't ask. It's hard to imagine why, and yet maybe it isn't really. Sometimes we are carrying burdens that seem too great, that we just can't bear to express. Or sometimes our needs might seem to us too trivial to share with others.